Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
There I stood in the doorway of our living room, still wearing the old flannel pajama pants and an oversized hoodie I've had since college, as I watched my mom lean in, press a kiss to my sister Emma's forehead, and say with the kind of soft joy you only see in movies, "The car outside is yours, sweetheart." Oh, sweetheart. Just like that. No build-up, no close your eyes and follow me. No magical red bow moment from a dealership commercial. Just a kiss, a smile, and a sentence that made something cold settle right in the middle of my chest. I didn't say anything, not because I couldn't, but because I knew if I opened my mouth in that moment, it wouldn't be pretty. I just stood there, holding a lukewarm cup of coffee that had started off strong but had been abandoned sometime between Emma's squealing over the size of the box with her name on it and Mom making a show of handing her the keys. Everyone clapped. My little cousin from Wisconsin whistled. Dad laughed and said something about her finally not borrowing my truck. The noise felt distant, like it was happening in another room, or like I was watching it through thick glass. I smiled. Not a real one. You know the kind. Tight, barely there. The kind you give when you're trying not to seem bitter, but it slips through anyway like a loose thread. I took a step back, pretending to reach for more coffee, and that's when Dad called out, "Hey, Meg, there's one here for you too." My stomach twisted, part dread, part expectation. I turned, trying not to look as curious as I felt, and walked back over. The box wasn't wrapped. Just a plain white envelope sitting on top of a slightly crushed, half-decorated gift bag. It didn't even have my name on it in handwriting, just a printed label. It felt impersonal, like someone mailed it from an office, but I took it, made a joke about it looking like a parking ticket, and sat down to open it. Inside the envelope was a letter, one page, single-sided, no glittery card, no heartfelt note. Just a neatly folded piece of paper with typed header and some official-looking font. I noticed Dad glance at it as I unfolded it, and something in his face changed. Not dramatically, not like in the movies where someone gasps or drops their drink, but enough that I noticed. His eyes widened, just for a second, and then his whole body sort of stiffened. He looked like someone had hit pause on him. I scanned the first few lines of the letter and realized immediately this wasn't a holiday card or some kind of gag gift. It was a formal notification, a congratulatory one, from a foundation I barely remembered applying to, for a legacy scholarship tied to a historical research program I'd submitted work to over a year ago. It had been delayed, apparently, lost in processing, but now it was official, approved, with a significant monetary award and an offer to work with a team based in Boston on a series of archival projects. It was, quite literally, life-changing. I felt a sudden wave of heat in my face, not excitement, confusion, maybe disbelief. But before I could speak, I looked back at Dad. He hadn't moved. He was still staring at the letter, his mouth barely open, as if he'd seen something he wasn't supposed to. That's when it hit me. He knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. The letter, the scholarship, the fact that it had sat somewhere forgotten or hidden for who knows how long. Something about the way he wouldn't meet my eyes told me this hadn't just shown up in the morning mail. Mom was still busy helping Emma FaceTime her boyfriend to show off the car, and the room was full of chatter and noise, but I felt like I was in a completely different place. The kind of stillness that feels louder than any noise. I folded the letter back up carefully, slid it into my hoodie pocket, and nodded at Dad as if to say thanks, though I wasn't sure what I was thanking him for. He nodded back but looked away fast. I walked out of the room, not angry, not yet, but heavy with something I couldn't name. As I climbed the stairs back to my old bedroom, I heard Emma laugh downstairs. Her voice ringing out, "Merry Christmas to me, huh?" And I almost laughed too. Not because it was funny, but because it sounded exactly like the kind of line someone writes in a script. Perfect. A little too perfect. When I got to my room, I sat on the bed and pulled out the letter again. This time, really reading it. Every line confirmed what I thought. I'd earned something huge. And no one had said a word, No one had called. No one had celebrated. It had been printed, sealed, and buried. And I was supposed to smile over coffee while someone else got the ribbon-wrapped keys. Downstairs, I heard Dad say something muffled, and Mom respond with, "She'll be fine. She always is." That was the moment the stillness cracked into something sharper. I didn't know it yet, but that was the beginning of the end, for how things used to be. By the time I shut the door to my old bedroom, the one with the faded posters still tacked up like artifacts from a different life, my fingers were already tracing the folds of the letter again. And despite the chatter and laughter still echoing from downstairs, I felt like I was standing in the eye of a storm I hadn't even seen coming. There was a strange comfort in the way the paper crinkled beneath my grip, controlled, deliberate, unlike everything else I'd just witnessed. And as I sat there in the half-light cast by the snow-covered window, I realized that it wasn't the scholarship itself that had thrown me off balance, but the fact that something so important, so validating, had been kept from me, buried under piles of holiday junk and plastic smiles, and that constant hum of what Emma wants, Emma gets. I had applied for the award a year and a half ago, during one of those restless nights when I was living paycheck to paycheck and fighting off the kind of burnout that wraps around your chest like a seatbelt in a crash. You don't know how tight it is until you try to breathe. I hadn't told anyone because, honestly, I hadn't thought I had a shot. It was a legacy grant named after a historian who had taught at the local university and died a war hero's death overseas. Something dignified and cinematic. And the requirements were steep, the kind that made you hesitate before even hitting submit. But I had done it anyway, more out of spite than confidence. And then I had forgotten about it, moved on, figured it was just another shot into the void. And now here it was, real and shiny and indisputably mine, except instead of arriving in a way that felt meaningful, it had been slipped to me like a side dish no one remembered ordering. I unfolded the letter again, and this time read every word slowly, letting them settle in. The foundation congratulated me, praised my work on regional family history, even referenced an article I'd written and assumed, wrongly, that my family would be so proud. I snorted at that part, a short, bitter breath, because if there was anything I knew with certainty, it was that pride in me was not something that ever spilled over around here. My heart was still racing, not with joy, but something tangled between anger and betrayal, when there was a soft knock on the door. I didn't answer at first, thinking maybe it was just someone looking for wrapping paper or a lost charger, but then Mom's voice slipped through the wood, tight and quiet and practiced. "Can we talk? Now." There was something about the way she said now, like she wasn't asking, and I considered ignoring her, pretending to be asleep or gone, or just not in the mood for one of her gentle guilt trips. But something made me stand and open the door anyway. And there she stood, holding a steaming mug in one hand, like a peace offering, and wearing that cardigan. She always pulled out for Christmas morning, the one with the red stitching along the collar and the missing button she refused to fix. She stepped into the room without waiting for me to invite her, sat at the edge of my bed like she had 100 times before when I was little and scared or sick or in trouble, and for a second, I almost let the familiarity soften me. But then I remembered the way her eyes had lit up when Emma unwrapped those keys, and I felt the cold settle back in. "I know you're upset," she began, carefully placing the mug on my nightstand, like setting a stage. And I wanted to say something earlier, but there was just so much going on. I didn't say anything. I waited. She sighed and clasped her hands together in her lap. "Your father didn't mean for it to come out that way. The letter, I mean, he found it last month while sorting through the office and meant to give it to you. He really did. But then things got hectic and, well, it just sort of got lost in the shuffle." I stared at her, trying to decide whether I believed her, whether it even mattered if I did. Because the truth was, lost in the shuffle didn't just describe a misplaced envelope, it described me. I had spent my entire life wedged between Emma's triumphs and my parents' distracted affection. always expected to understand, to wait, to be the easy one. So, I said, my voice flatter than I intended, you forgot to mention that I got a major scholarship because you were busy organizing Emma's car surprise? She looked down at her hands, not even bothering to defend herself, which in some twisted way made me angrier. It wasn't on purpose, she said, and it's not like it's not a big deal. We're proud of you. We just assumed you already knew. That did it. You assumed I knew? I laughed, loud and sharp. Mom, if I had known, I wouldn't be sitting here feeling like an afterthought on a day that was supposed to be about family, not favorites. She didn't respond right away. She just sat there, still and quiet, and I could tell she wanted to reach for me, to do that thing where she made it all about how hard things had been for her too, how complicated families are, how everyone makes mistakes. But I didn't want excuses. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted her to say what we both knew, that Emma was the golden child, that I had been left to figure things out on my own, that this wasn't just about a letter. It was about years of feeling unseen. I'm not mad about the scholarship, I said finally. I'm mad because if it had been Emma, there would have been balloons and cake and some Facebook post about how proud you were. But for me, I get a misplaced envelope and a hot mug of regret. She blinked, and for a moment she looked old, not tired old, worn. And I realized, maybe for the first time, that she didn't have the tools to handle this version of me, the one who wasn't going to just nod and swallow it all down. Without saying another word, she stood, gave me one last glance I couldn't quite read, and left the room, closing the door behind her with the kind of silence that echoed. I stared at that door for a long time, wondering if anything would ever really change, or if I'd just learned how to stop pretending. The morning after Christmas always feels like the hangover of the holiday, and even without any alcohol, the air around the house was thick with something heavier than leftover eggnog or cold turkey. There was a charged stillness to everything, the kind that clings to your skin like humidity before a storm. And as I walked past the living room, where torn wrapping paper still clung to the floor like confetti from a party no one wanted to clean up, I could feel the tension settling into the walls, nestling into corners like dust that's been ignored for too long. Emma was sitting on the couch, barefoot and curled up in one of those fleece blankets our aunt had sent us last year, holding her phone like it was a lifeline, swiping mindlessly through apps with that glazed-over look that people wear when they're avoiding reality. I didn't say anything to her, not because I didn't have words, but because I didn't think she'd hear me even if I screamed. Her world, even now, was completely intact. She had her car, she had the attention, she had the same bubble of support and celebration that had always been there for her, ready to puff her up with just enough praise to keep her floating, untouched by consequence or context. I, on the other hand, felt like someone had pulled the rug out from under me while telling me I should be grateful the floor was still warm. After the awkward non-conversation with my mother the night before, I'd spent the better part of the night lying awake, staring at the cracked ceiling above my childhood bed, the one that still bore faint glow-in-the-dark stars from a version of me who used to believe in big things. My thoughts had twisted and tangled into one long, furious string of questions. Why hadn't they told me sooner? What had actually happened to the letter? Why did they always seem so surprised when I pushed back? But beneath all that was something deeper, something that felt almost surgical in its sharpness. The realization that if I didn't do something, if I didn't reclaim my space in this family, I would always be the footnote in someone else's story. So I got up early, before the rest of them could blink the sleep from their eyes or start their second round of family brunching, and I did something that might have seemed petty on the surface, but felt, in the moment, like an act of clarity. I went into Dad's home office, the one he kept locked but never changed the key code for. Still my birthday, by the way, which I'm pretty sure even he forgot. And I sat down at his computer. Nothing crazy, nothing illegal, just a few careful adjustments in the financial software he used. Enough to delay the automatic payment for the deposit Emma needed to confirm the beach rental she'd been screaming about for weeks. It was her graduation trip, a house on the water with her friends, all paid for in part by Dad's gift. a mix of credit card and love, as he liked to joke. I didn't cancel anything. I didn't sabotage. I just paused it long enough for her to get the rejection email that would land right in the middle of her brunch plans. Just long enough for her to feel what it was like when something you were promised suddenly got yanked out from under you with no warning and no apology. And then I left the office, careful to delete any trace I'd been there, and went to the kitchen to make coffee, like I hadn't just declared silent war on my sister, with the kind of precision that comes from years of watching her get everything she wanted without ever asking twice. By noon, the storm hit. Emma's voice, loud and high-pitched, cracked through the house like a fire alarm, pulling everyone into the living room as she waved her phone like it was on fire. "It says my payment failed. How is that possible? Dad, what the hell?" Dad blinked at her, then pulled out his own phone to check. I leaned against the door frame with my mug, watching them scramble to troubleshoot something that should have been easy. Emma's face turned red, her hands flailed, and Mom, already stressed from whatever inner guilt she carried from last night's conversation, tried to calm her down, patting her arm and offering vague reassurances like, "It's probably just a glitch, and we'll call them after lunch." But the damage was done. I could see it in the way Emma looked at Dad, like he'd let her down for the first time in a long time. And I knew, somewhere inside that spoiled heart of hers, she was starting to feel the fray of not being the center of every solution. Later that evening, after the guests had gone and the cousins had returned to their out-of-town hotels, I found Emma sitting on the porch, staring out at the new car she still hadn't driven. The keys were on the kitchen counter, untouched since the big announcement, and her mood had deflated into something far less shiny than it had been 24 hours ago. She didn't look up when I sat beside her. I didn't say anything right away. I just let the silence stretch between us like a rope we were both tugging on, neither of us willing to speak first. Eventually, she muttered, "I didn't do anything wrong, you know." And maybe that's what pissed me off the most. Not the gift, not the party, not even the favoritism, but the fact that she truly believed that she had gone through life so insulated, so sheltered by good intentions and parental interference, that she couldn't see how much of her success came from simply being handed the tools while I was told to carve mine from scraps. I looked at her, really looked at her, the perfect hair, the manicured nails, the look of someone who had always assumed love and support were just standard issue, and said, "No, Emma, you didn't do anything wrong. You just didn't notice everything that was done for you." She didn't answer, but her silence was different this time. Less defensive, more uncertain. And for the first time in years, I felt like maybe she'd finally heard me. I stood up, left her there with her thoughts, and walked back inside, already thinking about what came next. Because this wasn't over. This was just the beginning. There's something about walking through your parents' house as an adult that hits differently the moment you stop pretending it's your home, because the walls start to look like they belong to strangers. The framed photos that once made you smile now remind you of the performances they required, and each familiar hallway feels like a museum exhibit of a life you no longer claim as your own. That's how I felt the morning after everything had started to shift. The car, the scholarship letter, the financial sabotage I'd quietly executed. And while no one said anything out loud, the undercurrent of tension was so thick that even the houseplant seemed to lean away from the drama. By now, Emma had stopped sulking long enough to start asking questions, which I could tell was making everyone nervous, because when she didn't have a clear target for her disappointment, she turned it inward in that spiraling way of hers. The one that forced everyone else to coddle her until she found someone to blame. She hadn't mentioned the car again, hadn't driven it, hadn't even posted about it on social media, which was practically a national emergency considering her usual feed of curated perfection. And though no one said it out loud, I knew they all suspected something was off. Dad was quieter than usual, his normal goofy jokes toned down, while Mom kept herself busy cleaning things that didn't need cleaning, rearranging knickknacks on the mantel like the right angle of a reindeer figurine could restore balance to a situation already teetering on the edge. I had spent the morning upstairs digging through my old boxes, the ones Mom had threatened to toss a dozen times over the years, ostensibly looking for a lost charger, but really trying to find any thread of proof that might help me piece together what had actually happened with the scholarship. The letter still didn't make sense, not just in content but in timing. The date on the header was from months ago, and yet no one had mentioned a word until Christmas morning. And when I looked closer, I saw that the envelope had another stamp on it, an internal forwarding label from Dad's office printer. That's when it hit me like a freight train loaded with every ignored birthday and sidelined accomplishment. He'd had the letter, not just found it, not just misplaced it. He'd had it long enough to scan it, print a second copy, and still decided it could wait until the day his other daughter got a car with a ribbon on top. Fueled by a mix of adrenaline and pure curiosity, I called an old friend of mine from college, Ben, a quiet guy who now worked part-time at the foundation that had issued the scholarship. We hadn't spoken in months, but as soon as I mentioned the award, his voice lit up with that tone of recognition you don't fake. "You're Megan Porter," he said. "Man, we've been trying to reach you for ages. We thought you moved or something." My stomach flipped. They had emailed me. They had mailed the letter more than once. They had even called, at my parents' landline apparently, leaving voicemails that were never passed on. And I realized with icy clarity that it hadn't been some innocent oversight or clerical error. It had been willful ignorance, or worse, intentional delay, because someone in this house, likely the man who had held that letter with trembling fingers on Christmas morning, had decided it wasn't time for me to know that I'd finally won something of value. When I asked Ben about the scholarship details, he sent over a transcript of the communications log, showing attempts to contact me over a 6-month period. And there it was in black and white, my name, my project title, and a big bold note. Award confirmed, recipient unresponsive. File transferred for follow-up. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I didn't even raise my voice when I printed the transcript out on Dad's printer and laid it on the kitchen table like a final piece of evidence at the end of a long trial. I just stood there for a moment, watching the pages flatten beneath my palms, and then walked away before anyone else could come in and discover what I'd found. But I wasn't done yet. That night, after dinner, I waited until the house was quiet, the lights dimmed, and the TV softly humming in the background with some forgettable Hallmark rerun, before I walked back into the living room and handed the transcript to Mom. She took it with that same cautious grace she used whenever someone handed her something unpleasant, tax forms, hospital bills, truth, and her eyes scanned the page slowly, her mouth tightening as the lines formed a narrative she could no longer rewrite with soft excuses. "What is this?" she asked, though I could tell she already knew. "It's what you didn't tell me," I said. "It's what you and Dad sat on while planning a surprise party for someone who already had everything." Her face crumpled, just slightly, as if my words had peeled something open that she'd worked hard to keep stitched shut. She tried to say something, but I held up my hand. "I don't want an apology," I said. "I want you to know, that I figured it out, that I'm not stupid, and I'm done playing the quiet one who smiles through being ignored." She nodded, once, barely perceptible, and I left her there with the paper still in her hands, the truth finally louder than any holiday carol playing in the background. What I didn't expect was Emma finding me later, not with a demand or a tantrum, but with the transcript in her hands and a confused look in her eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, not with anger but with something closer to disbelief. "You won something huge. You're leaving, aren't you?" For the first time in years, I saw my sister not as the golden girl or the princess, but as a young woman genuinely confused, maybe even hurt, and I didn't know how to respond because for once the roles were reversed. I had the thing worth envying, and she was the one standing in the shadows. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her, then at the keys still sitting untouched on the counter, and finally said, "Maybe I wanted to see what it felt like to have something that was just mine." And with that, I walked away, leaving her standing in the doorway with questions I didn't have to answer. Not yet. There's a moment when everything you've held in for years finally starts to unravel in front of the people who taught you how to keep quiet. That feels like stepping outside during a thunderstorm. Not because you're reckless or self-destructive, but because after so much time spent bracing for impact, there's something oddly liberating about facing the downpour with nothing left to hide behind. That's what it felt like as I stood in the living room, framed by the glow of soft white lights tangled through the garland on the mantel, with my sister clutching the transcript from the scholarship foundation like it was a page torn out of a novel she hadn't agreed to be part of, and my parents sitting across from me on the couch, both visibly rattled by the silent weight of everything I hadn't said for 2 decades, finally arriving in a form they couldn't ignore. Dad had that look he always got when something couldn't be fixed with a joke, his mouth a little too tight, hands folded in that stiff way that screamed discomfort. And Mom looked like she was trying to remember every parenting book she'd ever read in the hopes of saying something that wouldn't make it worse. Emma, for once, didn't say anything. She just sat beside me, the transcript still in her lap, eyes darting from me to them and back again like she was waiting for someone else to deliver a punchline that wasn't coming. "I want to be very clear," I began, my voice steady not because I wasn't angry, but because I'd spent so long carrying that anger around that it had lost its fire and hardened into something sharper. "This isn't just about a letter or a scholarship, or the fact that you apparently decided I didn't need to know something that could have changed the course of my entire year. This is about the fact that you looked at what I earned, and instead of celebrating it, you buried it beneath someone else's celebration. Again." Mom opened her mouth, probably to apologize, or rationalize, or deliver one of those carefully worded phrases about how parenting isn't perfect, and everyone does their best. But I didn't let her speak. I had let her speak for years. And this time, it was my turn. "You always said you loved us the same," I continued. "But loving us the same doesn't mean treating us the same. It means seeing what each of us needs. And you never seemed to see that I needed to be seen. I didn't want cars or vacations or big surprises. I just wanted to matter as much as Emma did. And somehow, no matter what I did, I was always the one expected to understand, to wait, to forgive." I looked at Dad, who had finally dropped his gaze to the floor, and for a second, I almost let myself feel sorry for him, for the way he seemed so completely unprepared to deal with a daughter who wasn't smiling through disappointment anymore. "I don't need you to fix this," I said. "It's too late for that. I just needed to say it out loud. I needed you to hear it from me, not from a therapist or a letter or a screaming match." The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the refrigerator down the hall, and for a moment, no one moved. Then Emma reached over, placed the transcript on the coffee table between us, and finally spoke. "I didn't know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but there was something real in it. Regret, maybe, or shame. "I didn't know how much you did. I always thought you were just fine, like you didn't need it the way I did." And there it was, the crux of it all, the illusion I'd helped create, the mask I'd worn so well that even my sister, my own flesh and blood, couldn't see past it. I nodded slowly, not to forgive, not yet, but to acknowledge the truth in what she'd said. "I was never fine," I said. "I was just good at pretending." That night, we didn't argue. There were no shouting matches or dramatic exits. We just sat there, the 4 of us, surrounded by twinkling lights and the faint scent of cinnamon candles, the tension finally giving way to something else. Not peace, not yet, but something quieter, a truce, maybe, an understanding that while things couldn't be undone, they could be seen for what they were. I told them about the offer in Boston, about the chance to work with a historical research team, and finally do something that mattered to me. And while they were supportive, I could see the guilt simmering just beneath the surface, the kind that comes from realizing too late that your child has been growing in a shadow you didn't even know you were casting. When I said I was leaving in 2 weeks, Mom's eyes welled up and Dad stood to hug me, his grip firmer than usual, like he was trying to hold on to something slipping away. Before I left the room, Mom slipped a small folded note into my hand, the kind she used to tuck into my lunch boxes in middle school with doodled hearts and reminders to smile. I didn't open it right away. I waited until I was alone, sitting in my old car with the engine idling, the snow tapping gently against the windshield like a soft knock from the past. Inside the note, there were no words, just a simple, crude drawing of a car, the kind a child might sketch in the margins of a notebook, with 2 stick figures in the front seat and a single question mark in the back. I stared at it for a long time, unsure what it meant. An apology, a reminder, or maybe just a silent invitation to come back someday and let them try again. But I folded it back up, slid it into my coat pocket, and pulled out of the driveway without looking back. Not because I was angry or unforgiving, but because sometimes the only way to move forward is to stop waiting for someone else to catch up. And as the snow fell heavier and the road stretched out ahead, I let myself smile. Not the tight, tired smile of someone trying to keep the peace, but the real kind, the kind that comes when you finally choose yourself.